Okay, give it just a minute. It says it's preparing to live stream the meeting. Okay, go ahead.
Welcome, everyone. Today is April 28th, 2020. We are at a pre-council workshop. It is 6:05 p.m. Summer, can we please do a roll call to see who all is in attendance with us today?
Yep. I have Chuck Williams, city engineer. I lost the mayor. Give me just a sec. Connie Knutson Boyd, Moab City Council. Carly Castle, Assistant City Manager. Joel Linares, City Manager. Kaylin Jones, Moab City Council. Karen Guzman Newton, Moab City Council. Clint York, Finance Director. Laurie Simonson, City Attorney. Levi Jones, Water Superintendent. Mike Duncan, Moab City Council. Ronnie Darasari, Moab City Council. Susie Becker, Zions Bank Public Finance. And Emily Niehaus, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me, Summer?
I can.
We're starting agenda item 1.1, water rate presentation. Chuck, I believe you'll take it away.
I missed that. I'm sorry, I was breaking up on my end.
Do you want to say anything, Joel, to start this?
Yes, so we've been working for the last several months over restructuring our water rates. Last year, our water rates, which is one of our enterprise funds, it was operating in the red. An enterprise fund for a city is a fund that we are allowed to raise revenue in because it's providing an essential service. Water and sewer fall into those categories. And so through rates and rate studies, we're able to set rates that allow us to make sure that those certain services that we provide are sustainable outside of our normal cash revenue flows. And so it's irresponsible on our part as a staff and to not bring these studies to you and this information to keep our revenues at a proper place where the enterprise fund can self-sustain. And like I said, last year, our water was about $58,000 in the red. So we've been working with Zions Bank, trying to get a new rate study put together and rate information so you guys can understand and be presented with the information you need in order to make a decision that puts that enterprise fund in the black and operating in the black going into the future. Rachel worked with Susie Becker's with us from Zions Bank Public Finance, and we've worked with her. We've had several meetings with her, and she's an awesome individual who does amazing things and much smarter than I'll ever be. And I can't thank her enough for all that she's done for us and the information she's provided us as a staff and what she'll provide for you guys here tonight. We've been working hard to get Clint brought up to speed, and Chuck and Levi are both here. So if there's questions, we can answer those. We're going to start off with Chuck presenting a slideshow presentation where he's going to give you a rate study information, and then Susie will take over from there and she'll show you kind of how you could adjust it. And she's going to have a spreadsheet where we can actually in live time adjust it, and you can see what those different changes and different things can do. And it literally, if it's good, it's green. If it's yellow, and if it's bad, it's red. And so if we want to play with that, we can adjust it around, and you can see in live time what those adjustments do and how that's changing. So we'll turn the time over to Chuck and go to Susie from there and take questions at that point. And like, pretty sure we'll quickly eat up 40 minutes. So go ahead, Chuck.
Share screen. So I wanted to give a little bit of a presentation, a little background and history, and then get into some of the details of this. I'll try and keep it moving, probably about 10 minutes. Why consider water rates? When the city tried to obtain funding from the state for a new water storage tank about 4 years ago, we were told that we needed a master plan and a rate study. And the state funded both the master plan and this rate study. And the master plan was adopted in July of 2018, but we've updated it with more current information. Think about it similar to what happened with the water reclamation facility. The state was willing to loan us money, but they needed to know that we had a rate structure in place where we could meet our debt service. Secondly, rates have not kept up with either inflation or the needs of the system. Based on talking with Rachel, who had been here the longest, rates have not been adjusted within the last 10 years. This year, we are operating in a deficit and will do so again next year if the rates are not adjusted per the rate study, for the analysis that you'll see a little bit later. Talk briefly about the water system condition. Here's an example of one of our cast iron pipes leaking when it was uncovered. Another one, we got within 3 to 4 feet of this pipe, relieved the earth pressure and from the side, and it just blew out. Some of our system is almost World War II era, we think, with some lead joints in fact. Here's an example of another pipe where the seam breaks. This is a cast iron pipe. Network designers often use 50 years as the average life expectancy for most pipe types. So if you keep that in mind, that 50 years is when you should basically be replacing them. In 2018, Utah State University did a study on water pipes in the United States and Canada. And the thing I'd point out in this white box that even more concerning is the break rates of cast iron and asbestos cement pipe, which have increased, which make up 41% of the installed water mains in the US and Canada, have increased by more than 40% over a 6-year period. Take that down to the second bullet. Cast iron pipe has 20 times more breaks in highly corrosive soils than in low corrosive soils. Corrosive meaning basically saline or salty soils. Moab has highly corrosive soils. Corrosion is a major cause of water main breaks, and utilities with a higher percentage of iron pipe may experience a higher percentage of corrosion-related breaks. So the takeaway from this slide is cast iron pipes aren't really a good thing to have in your system, because if you have highly corrosive soils, they'll break on you, and they'll break at any given time after 50 years. And the bad news is this is a breakout of our water system by material type. 36% of it's PVC or plastic pipe, essentially, and 62% is cast iron pipe. So we have old pipe that's not the right pipe for these type of soil conditions. An analysis of the age of our system and the length and mileage, and what that percentage of the total overall mileage is for pipes over 4 inches, shows that pipes that are older than 50 years and as much as older than 60 years make up 58% of our system. And if some of the unknown pipes come over into that, say 7%, we're right at 2/3 of our system is over 50 years old. So that's why we have concerns about that. We looked at past water replacement projects because we do have a water system and it is functioning now. And from 2006 until now, period of about 13 years, we've installed 12,450 feet of pipe. Or if you just average at it, that's about 958 feet. The USU report says that we should be replacing 4,393 feet per year of a system of our size. So we're doing 22% of what we should be doing in order to have a system that's maintained on average. Quick review of our existing facilities. Our system has 4 springs and 3 wells. 2 of the wells are Culinary, 1 is for irrigation out of the golf course. We have 3 1 million gallon storage tanks, about 48 miles of pipe. Our source protection area is about 28 miles now. That's going to change in the near future. We're working on updating those right now. Total water use, between 1,800 and 2,400 acre feet per year. Number of connections, which I think is an interesting statistic, 1,746 residential, 562 commercial, or about 2,308 connections. Known issues, we have inadequate fire suppression in places. We have failing pipes. We have low circulation in the system extremities. We need things like more pressure reducing valves. Budget source, fully funded by the Water Enterprise Fund. This budget year we're in now is $1.26 million. dollars for that fund, and we're operating in a $54,000 deficit this year. Future facilities, that's what the water distribution plan did, is it formed a framework for what our capital improvements were. I'll talk quickly about that. We need an additional 1,500 gallons per minute for source capacity. Source is essentially another well or two. Storage, we need another 2.2 million gallon storage tank. Fire flow projects are about $3 million. Those are future needs, and I'll show you a little bit more of those. But in the fiscal year 21 budget, if there is no rate increase, we'll go from a $54,000 deficit to a $98,000 deficit. And that's not including that what the state recommends is that we should have 5% of our annual water budget set aside sort of as a rainy day fund for the calamity. If something were to happen to one of our tanks, to one of our wells, we'd have an ability to respond to that. Future projects, capital improvement needs are about $15 million with major maintenance needs of $163 million. I know I don't expect you to be able to read this, but this is a list of all the projects. And there's the $15 million bottom line down here. They include 2 new wells, constructing the storage tank, and as you can see here, lots of pipe replacements. And then working on some fire hydrants for the major maintenance needs. We made a presentation to the Water Conservation Drought Management Advisory Board twice in the last couple of months. And Zion's Bank had done some analysis of cities across the state. And we took theirs and we went in, and the board had said, well, what about cities our size, Chuck? Go look at the rates for them. I know this is difficult to read, but I'll just point out that this is, Park City is a base rate is the monthly rate, not dependent upon the usage rate, which is the number of gallons that people use. So some places have a base rate. GWISA, Grand Water and Sewer, does $21.75 a month, and you pay for every drop of water that you get. Other places, like in Moab right now, we have a base rate of $10 a month, and you get up to 2,000 gallons included in that. So you don't get charged for the first 2,000 gallons. But for comparison, and this time allowed, looking at the base rate up here, Park City is $50.55 the high, and it goes down through the list. And of the 30 cities we polled, Moab has the lowest rate at $10 per month. And then with an average, if you take those 30 cities, it comes out to be the average rate is $24.89 per month. And GWISA's, our neighbor outside of the city, is $21.75. But the water board suggested that we look at more cities that are just about Moab size. So here's 15 of those cities, and you can see the name of the city. I'll just pick West Bountiful. And here's the population, 5,578. And we're right at 5,259. So, you know, similar, certainly. Did the same thing. Highest rate was Park City. Lowest rate is Moab. Interestingly, the average for the smaller communities is actually higher than the average that includes some of the larger communities. And then these other columns here, which I know is a lot to read, talk about what the usage rate tiers are. We talk about tiers, we talk about like 0 to 3,000 gallons is tier 1, 3,000 gallons to 10,000 gallons is tier 2. But we thought this was good information to see where we are compared to other communities of a similar size, and this was as the water board asked us to look at, and we've done so. Just a quick map of those communities scattered across the state, north, south, east, west. We sent out the draft rate study. Kaylin had asked we send that out, so we sent that out, I don't know, yesterday or today. And these options were based upon the good work Zion's Bank has done. And I'll turn it over to Susie here in a moment. But this is a summary of what these options are. And as staff with management and finance, we tried to come up with a range of options depending upon what the goals are that council decides that it might want to try and accomplish. So you're going to see options here from taking one method of taking care of addressing all of our capital needs, down to let's at least make up for that $98,000 deficit next year. But we don't address the capital needs significantly, if at all. And I'll let Susie talk more about that. But these are the quick options, and I'll have a table that's easier to read than this in a minute. Option one, base rates would be increased next year by 75%, which would take it up to $17.50 per month. Residential usage rates would increase by 50% in 2021 and would be adjusted so that tier one includes the first 3,000 gallons. So in other words, that $17.50 a month base rate would allow you to get up to 3,000 gallons, which is about what an average family of 3 would use for a small home in a month. The commercial base rates, again, this was based upon input from the water board, would increase by 100% in 21, both the monthly base rates and the usage rate. And I believe that the logic for that was that they can raise their rates to their customers to pay for the increase in rate. And then all rates would increase by 3% annually starting in 2022, similar to what we do with the sewer rates. As you'll recall, the council years back adopted the 5-year sewer rates that have an incremental increase every year to account for inflation. This would also include a $5 million bond in 2020 and a $5 million bond in 2023 to help pay for those capital expenses to get going on some of those things, particularly the new well and the replacement of the Mill Creek Road water line. Option two, increase it by 70%. It's a different one. It takes care of it's less of an increase. Option three, capital expenses. This would only take care of not 100% of the capital, $15 million, but about 86%. Would allow for all base and usage rates to be increased 100% to a rate of $20. Then there'd be the ones that needed to be done. Option four, capital expenses are down to 50%. In other words, we're not going to address the $15 million of need. We'll try and address $7.5 million, hoping that that's enough. And in this case, the base rate would go up to $18 in 2023. And the last option was, and I'll show you this in a table, it's a lot easier to look at, would only consider a rate increase to cover operating costs. And that would be to make up for that $98,000 deficit, but we would not have the financial ability to complete any of the capital projects. And here's the table. So option one, which was the address, and this was our best shot at trying to address some of the comments from the water board. I'm not suggesting Mike was there and he made the motion. I'm not suggesting this addresses it 100%, but we tried to capture what my understanding was from the water board. This would be a rate increase to $17.50 in 2021, and then 3% per year thereafter in the base increase. Commercial would go from $25 to $50, so that's a 100% increase, and so would their usage rates as well, and then go up incrementally year after year, 3% as well. Option two would be increase to the $17.50 base rate, and then move forward. And you see the bonds are different as well. I'll let Susie talk to the option three, 86% of the projects. This one doesn't really work because it's the biggest increase, in my opinion. It's the biggest rate increase next year of 100%, but then it just levels out at $20 into the foreseeable future. Here we just do 50% of the capital projects, and it jumps up to $14.20 next year, and then incremental increases thereafter. Only lets us do 50% of the projects. And Susie will talk more about the cash on hand, what this row down here means, because this is a lot of parameters that are involved in this. And then option five, which is the operational cost only. In order to make up for that $98,000 deficit next year, we need to increase it $1 per month for residential. And then it gets increased 3% thereafter, but there's no capital improvements. There's no rainy day fund under those scenarios. Water Conservation Drought Management Board input. I've tried to summarize this. base rate might need to be increased and include tier 1 as part of the base rate. In other words, no usage fees for tier 1. They felt I felt that there was general consensus, and they made a motion to this, generally speaking, that we keep the up to 3,000 gallons per month included in the base rate. So if you're an average family, you would know what your base rate is, and if you kept it under 3,000 gallons a month, your rate would be under option 1, it'd be $17.50. Under other options, you saw those. Increase the commercial rates beyond the residential increase. So option 1, that's why we went back and tried to modify that. Commercials increase 100%, residential increase 75%, and then 3% thereafter. And then increase the rates for the highest volume users as a conservation incentive. So people who use more water, raise those rates even higher, because the idea is that if it gets too expensive, they'll go down and find ways to use less water. And that becomes a conservation incentive. And with that, that's all I have in this PowerPoint. Susie is ready to work with me and anyone else on staff trying to address any questions or comments. She has the spreadsheets, which she could take over the machine and work some in real time if you'd like. Any questions for me or Susie?
I have a question. So for residences, do you have a table that shows under the different scenarios what residential customer that uses, that gets billed in the different tiers would pay? So I'm envisioning a grid with the current rate plus the options in one axis, and then the different tiers in the other, just to give us a sense of what the monthly cost under the different options to the typical residential customer would be.
Susie, could you answer that?
Hold on 1 minute here. I'm gonna share my spreadsheet with you and answer your question. I mean, you could do that. You could just take what some current rates are, an average user, and you could then compare what it would be under the next and make an easy grid. We have done that for part of other projects. It wasn't really part of what we originally had scoped for this one, but we could put something together pretty simple to show you how much someone's tax or rates, fees might increase.
Over 3,000 gallons, right? Because the residential, at least under option, the 3,000 gallons would be included, up to 3,000 gallons is included in the base rate, right?
That's right. Do you want me to jump in and talk about the spreadsheet, and can you see it? Great. First of all, thank you. And Chuck, that was an awesome summary. And it was great working with Moab. What a wonderful city. Rachel, Chuck, Joel, everybody was awesome in getting us information and spending a lot of time going through and talking about some of the different options and what they mean. So we have a fairly detailed spreadsheet, but we also have here a summary tab to try to simplify the results so that you can play with the numbers if you want to. So as we look at this, there's really going to be two metrics that we track as we try to get enough, our rates high enough to cover our cost. But we also have to keep two other metrics, measurements. We have to keep a good watch on them. And one is our debt coverage ratio. The minute you have any debt outstanding, you've always got to make sure that your revenues are 1.25 times as much as your operating expense plus your debt service. No, count your capital project. So in other words, if our revenues were $125, we're going to use really easy small numbers here, we could not have operating costs and debt service of more than $100 a year and keep our ratio of 1.25, which is what the bond rating companies require, and it's usually written in your bond covenants. So we are tracking on this line, this right here, this ratio as we issue debt, and want to make sure we don't go below 1.25. If we get between 1.25 And 1.5, it will go yellow to kind of say, okay, caution, let's look out. Green is good, you're good to go. And if we get down below, and you'll see it in a minute, so I'll change the numbers, below 1.25, it will go red, which means we would then have to increase our rates. The second metric that we track is days cash on hand. So how much cash do we really need on hand? If you talk to AWWA, their recommendation is 275 days. But you know what? No cities really do that. Most of them target 180 days. And if you go below down to about 150 days, you're going to start affecting your bond rating negatively. So on this line, it's green if it's above 180 days, it's yellow between 150 and 180 days, and it goes red below 150 days. So this is how we play with it. And this is, like I said, the summary tab. So here's all your rate categories. Here is what you're now charging in 2019, 2020. And then we have jumped these by 75%. And this one is actually by 100%. We've moved these a little bit here to do these by 100%. The other ones are by the 75%, so they're in yellow. And this is the option 1 that Chuck talked about, and then 3% per year thereafter. In terms of usage rates, okay, so here's our usage rates. We've got 75% here. Were we going 50 on this, Chuck?
We went 50% on the resident.
Okay. Then we'll just do this one back at 50. We're changing these all the time. Here we go, 50, 50. Commercial was 100. Commercial 100 on all of here. And you can see here that we stay within our margins. Don't worry about the first year. Don't worry about this. We're starting with 2021. We get down here a little, but then we come back up. So the question then I think that many people ask is, well, why do we go up and down so much? You know, we're keeping our rates fairly constant. Well, if Chuck would just plan these capital projects to be exactly 300,000 or 400,000 every year the same, but just teasing, Chuck. As you know, you have like a huge expense one year for a tank or something, and then you may have a smaller cost the next year and another big one a couple of years later. So our cash on hand fluctuates significantly with those capital projects. So let's just play with these numbers for a minute now, and I'll show you how it works with the rates. So we have some bonds in here. Only worry about right in here. Don't worry about any of this here. One of my assistants went through and checked numbers, and we don't need to even look at any of this stuff. But over here, our first bond, if we put it in year 2020, and we put it in at $5 million, we were keeping all of our ratios. But let's say we only want to issue for $4 million. And this option covers all our capital projects in the years that Chuck has given me. We're fine on our debt coverage ratio because we didn't issue as much debt. But because we don't have those bond proceeds, we get in trouble here with these cash on hand. We're okay again in 2024 because we issued another bond, and that put our cash back up higher. So we've said, we need to probably issue a little more debt there. And I'm just going to put us back where we were. So what if, I know that everyone always wants to keep rates as low as we can. So let's see if we were to reduce our rates for a minute here. Let's reduce all of these. Let's make them all at 50%. Okay. So let's just go 50% all the way down. I'm just showing you how this works for a minute here. So now no one's going to have, I think that one's connecting to theirs. Okay, so now we've only raised them by 50%. So what happens now, as we go back up here, here's two problems. One, we don't have enough cash on hand because we didn't raise our rates enough. But we can't issue this second bond because now we haven't raised rates enough to have enough revenues to cover our debt coverage ratio. So we've gone into the red. Okay, so that's just a couple examples of how this works and how we tried to minimize rates as much as we could, but yet we had to do them in order to cover the capital projects. We felt like we had to go at least 75% or we would not be able to have enough cash on hand to issue our bonds. Which then when we issue the bonds then it brings up our days cash as well. So do you have any questions about, I mean, it's a very detailed model that pulls from the prior page. It goes through all your capital projects, operating expenses, the outstanding debt, but this just pulls it here to show you what we're watching as we play with the rates. Do you have questions on those, or does anyone have a scenario they want me to try and just see what it does for fun?
I was just curious if we could do like 50% across the board, and then I don't know if it's possible to, after 3,000 gallons, to also incentivize, and I don't know what that list looks like with residential and commercial of how many are using above 3,000, and could we make enough funds to incorporate both?
Yeah, we can do both of those. We can just hand put these in if you want to make these, quite a bit higher, sort of a conservation type of effort. So if you want to pick, like, say we wanted to put this to $2 and $2.50, is that kind of what you're thinking? Something like that?
Yes. Yeah, that is what I was thinking.
Okay. And then outside of city, we'd want to do them even higher. Maybe we put them up to, want to get them up to 3 even, just for fun.
Oh.
350. We could certainly play with those. So I'm just putting them in yellow to show they don't pull from the formula anymore, which is fine. It works either way. What about commercial? Commercial, some people have a hard time doing conservation with commercial because most businesses really can't conserve. But that's up to you. If you want to go higher on those, we can.
Yeah, let's try going a little higher.
Okay, 350.
And question, do we discriminate at all between like commercial that's just shops and stores versus like agriculture?
I don't know that. How are you billing your agriculture? You're not billing it as commercial, are you?
I think we only have 2 rates. Is that correct, Chuck?
Yeah, residential and commercial. We don't have an agricultural rate.
This is all you have right here.
So that's that. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, you wouldn't want to hurt them. I agree. Okay, commercial outside city. Let's go them to 4.5. Just for fun. Okay, and then we probably don't want to do any more here. On these groups, I would assume. Institutional is tied to commercial in terms of the upward billing. Let's just do it the same here and go to, well, they were at 350 and 4. Let's just do them the same here. Okay, so let's see what happens here. Okay, that helped us a little. We aren't negative anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, Susie, one thing that Chuck pointed out to us at the water board related to a couple of other questions here is that many of the users are up at tier 2, 3, and 4 and so forth like that. A pretty fair fraction of the total volume of water that the city residents use doesn't come out of tier 1, it comes out of 2, 3, and 4, as I say. So any rate increases that you assign to those tiers are going to raise a disproportionately high fraction of revenues.
Great point. Here it is. This is just the residential in city. You can see the usage by tier. We can change the groupings and then you can see how they change, but that's exactly percent of usage. And this is where you're really hitting most of your customers.
Yeah. And Susie, if I may, while I got the floor, one other question. Rachel's often told us because we have a lot of money out for the water reclamation facility that the city really is not in a precarious position to issue further bonds and so forth, particularly in the absence of a municipal property tax. So are you telling us that your bank, for example, would be comfortable doing so as long as we have the requisite amount of cash on hand? Is that correct?
We got to be clear though that you're talking 2 different lines of funding. So you just referenced the WRF, which is a sewer line of funding, and we use sewer rates to generate and pay for that and get bonding for that. This is all water, the water side of things. So it's almost like 2 separate entities doing 2 separate things.
Well, the city stands behind them both, do they not?
Absolutely. When you're trying to get bonding for water, you're using the water numbers. When you're trying to get bonding for sewer, you're using your sewer and your sewer rate numbers. So you're using one to get one and one to get another. Ultimately, the same person's on the hook, but you have two revenue sources to get two different lines of funding.
Okay. It's if one final question, Susie, is I appreciate you playing with all the numbers here, but in my mind, trying to make some sense out of all this, I really kind of like Chuck's scenario 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 business, which kind of range from the Cadillac version, if you will, down to the poor Chevy version of it. I mean, basically do nothing but just cover operating costs. And in your recommendation, for example, I mean, I can tell you what my preferences were, but I won't right now because I want to see what everybody else thinks. In terms of one of those scenarios, which one strikes you as being the best for the city?
So are you asking me or your other city council members?
All of the above.
Well, I just want to say, I'll just jump in first and say, I'm totally in with Chuck. We spent a lot of time coming up with those 5 options. And my purpose tonight was to kind of show you why we ended up with those options, because you start trying to put the rate much less, you're limited on your bonding. And so as we worked through it, we felt good about those 5 options.
And so would it be helpful for the council now to discuss those options so that you have direction, Chuck, on what to bring to us next? Is that where we are?
Yeah.
So maybe we can, Susie, you can take your screen down so that we can all sort of see each other.
Okay, let me figure how
Unless anyone else has any further questions. And while you're doing that, I should share, you know, as you all know, I do sit on the water quality board for the state of Utah. And not this past meeting, but the meeting before, there was quite a lot of talk about encouraging cities to increase water rates and charge for usage because of the amount of hardship grants that that this board sees. And so it is sort of a little, I don't know if embarrassing is the right word, but to be, you know, one of the lowest rates of the state, it does make me recognize that taking action on this, although what horrible timing, but taking action on this is important for us. And it's not just from a local perspective, but it's from a state perspective as well. So how do we want to go about the discussion about our options here? Does anybody have a preference of that they want to start off with?
Can we see them one more time? Can we see the list?
Yeah. I'll pull it right up.
Ronnie, do you have a question while he's pulling it up?
Sorry, I had to unmute. I'm also wondering, is it easy to get information that helps us look at those communities and their AMI? I'm just wondering. I'm just curious what that would look like compared to our AMI.
Oh. Yeah, I'm sure we could do that. But we went to the Utah demographic site to get the population numbers for the various communities. I suspect that's there. I don't know. I didn't look for that. But we can try and find that. Okay. Is this what you want to see, Tani?
Yeah, yeah. And why didn't you like option number 3? Why did you feel like that wasn't the best?
Well, it was the biggest jump at once. That's the only thing. It went from $10 today to $20 in July 1st, essentially, or somewhere along that line. And whereas, you know, up here it's a big jump. I agree, but it's not as big a jump at once. And then it's incremental with inflation, 3% increases. Whereas here, it's you take the big jump once and you leave the big jump. You know, you don't increase it 3% per year.
And then 1 and 2 address those capital projects, all of them, or just a percentage of them, or?
1 addresses all of them, correct, Susan? Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Two does as well.
Is there a reason, Susie and Chuck, that only in option one, the rates for the commercial is on that line? I mean, is there?
No, the only reason is, Karen, is we went back and redid option one after input from the water board. And they gave us pretty clear direction about, I felt, about increasing the commercial at a different percentage rate than the residential. Whereas all these other ones are pretty consistently the same residential and commercial increases. Whereas option one, this one made a larger increase for 100% increase from 25 to 50 for the commercial, and here a 75% increase. So that's why we showed that. It was a part of the direction from the water board, the request from the water board.
Gotcha. Yeah, okay. I guess I'll just start quickly. I mean, with option one, I would be just under, COVID times and businesses lacking funds. I mean, I would be nervous to come out and tell commercial businesses that we're, raising their rates 100%. But that is just, that's my feeling as of right now.
I agree with that, Karen. And I also think that it's probably worth, as you were pointing out, also the, just looking at, there's the base rate and then a higher rate for additional use. So conservation through water rate.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, if I may, let me just state my preferences, kind of a preliminary sort of thing. I looked at the 5 options here, and just out of habit, option 5 for me is not under consideration, because I think that we're just basically kicking the can down the road, and I would hate to go to all this trouble to do basically nothing except go through all this again. So that's out. Option 1, the Cadillac version, option 1 or 2, because we're in such desperate financial straits right now, I'd be a little reluctant to do that. And I'm ignoring the question of commercial versus residential increases at the moment. So either option 3 or 4 in my mind, it depends on how comfortable you guys feel about it. I mean, it's just kind of a compromise that clearly we need to do a lot of work on capital projects, but do we have the money to do so? So I'm looking for a compromise. So 3 or 4, okay, is kind of where I sit.
And then I'm sorry, Mary, I can't see everybody.
Yeah.
So I am just curious, can we do 3 or 4 or 2 and add that conservation element into it? I mean, because it seems like that's really, I mean, we're in as it's 100 degrees and it's only April. I mean, I'm concerned about drought conditions and again, we keep having the discussion about conservancy. So I mean, can we do a little mix? I know you guys worked on it really hard, Chuck. Would it be possible?
We can go back and look at other options. Clearly, that's what we wanted as input from council to do that. I just would point out quickly that Susie's educated me as we go through this, that and Susie kick in, that there needs, the institutions prefer that some level of the financial stability is reflected in a base rate as opposed to just usage rates, because usage rates can fall so quickly. But yeah, we can certainly, I'm taking notes here, trying to get some direction from council, go back and we'll do that after this.
Yeah, can I just jump in? You do have a conservation rate in there already, because you do charge more per 1,000 gallons at the higher usage. It just depends to what extent you want to penalize people for the really, really high use. So that's just where we would probably need some direction, because you already have some built in.
Gotcha.
I don't know that we really want to penalize people, or especially commercial users that have higher uses, because they're a different animal. I mean, if you've got a swimming pool and hot tub and 100 hotel rooms, obviously your usage is going to be higher. You can do everything that you can to conserve that and to mitigate that, but I don't know that we want to make that punitive to people. That's just kind of my thought.
It's a really hard balance what we're trying to strike. We all want to conserve water. We want to give people an incentive to do that. You're also trying to balance the cost of operating your system. And you're also trying to balance the ability to get bonding to go forward with your system. If we did a conservation rate, like Karen's saying, to the point that it incentivized everyone to go rip out their yards and put in xeriscaping, and that would be great. And we started saving tons of water, but then our revenues just plummeted because we weren't selling any water. We would still then have to go back in and raise the indoor use rate substantially to operate the system on a day in and day out basis. So there's a bit of a balance between the three you're always trying to strike.
I wanted to point out too that I do think we really need to consider option 1 and option 2 account for, if I'm reading this correctly, 100% of capital projects. So if we start looking at 3, 4, 5, then we're not collecting enough for our spending needs. Is that correct, Joel?
Correct. Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I jump in with one other comment? Chuck alluded to this, the percent of your revenues you now get from base versus usage. You are really low in the percent that you get from your base fee, which is only about 33, 34% of your revenues. You're getting much more from usage now than you are from your base fees. And, you know, it works both ways. I can understand where you want to control those who use more, pay more. But on the other hand, you have more volatility with wet and dry years. And remember years ago, Salt Lake County did that slow the flow and everyone conserved and the revenues dropped considerably. So if you were to put your usage rates way up, you might find yourself short on revenue. It's just a thought as you come to your compromise, but those are some things I've noticed and seen.
Hey, Mayor, this is Carly. Can I make one quick comment?
Oh, absolutely.
So one thing that I thought was really interesting, I appreciate Tani's comment about not wanting to be punitive, because she's right. Some businesses are operating really efficiently, but they're just using a lot of water, for example. It's not that they're wasteful or something. And so, but there is a different consideration, because the peak, when we're delivering the most water we can at one point during the summer, for example, that's the most expensive water we deliver, because we have to size our systems for that peak day. So when we charge higher water users higher rates, it's to make sure they're truly paying their way for that expanded capacity. I hope does that make sense? So it's not punishing them necessarily, or it's incentivizing, but it's also saying we need to collect an appropriate amount of revenue to make sure we're collecting for that peak, those capital projects and those operational projects that we need to maintain for the peak.
No, that makes perfect sense.
It's a
And
little
that's-
close to being able to provide that level of service.
And I
This is
think that
Ronnie.
goes
Can I
to
add
what
something?
Joel,
Oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Jump in there, Ronnie.
I mean, I'm concerned with it on the resident end too, because we have some people who go out of their way to use no more water than they need. And I feel like there should be some form of reward for that. And then we also obviously have a lot of people doing things that we're trying to encourage, like grow their own food. And obviously their use goes up in the summer, and they might not be using much anyway, so it's not going to be too much. But I mean, I'd kind of like to be assured that that's all built into this as well. And I totally agree with what Carly's saying. And a lot of my concerns rest on that end too. I mean, part of what we all have to accept over time is that water is not as cheap as we were told for so long that it is, and it has a true cost, especially in the time of climate change. And I just personally need a little bit more time to digest all of this. So I don't know what the next steps are.
So
Well, I'm sorry, Kaylin, I'm going to interrupt you because the next steps are really important and we do only have 5 minutes left before our meeting. So Kaylin, if you want to make your comment, and then Joel, I want to hear from you what our next steps are, and then we're going to have to move on for our regular meeting.
Okay, so I support the differential between residential and commercial. I feel like we already have a conservation incentive, and we're not bumping up against the water yet. So I feel like I don't want to, and for reasons that have already been articulated, I don't necessarily want to go further in that direction. I would like to see the city helping the residents in other ways to figure out how to conserve, besides just using the rates as what appears to be the primary tool that we engage with them. And also we can also encourage them for their time of day use. Many cities do that in terms of either like restrictions on times or on watering days. And so there's some low-hanging fruit that we can do to get us to our goals besides just the rates. And I like having regardless of which scenario we use, I like doing the annual small percentage increase. And I would like to see that table showing what residents pay for under different tiers for the different options. That's what I've got.
Okay, Joel, next steps.
I think all of you make really good points, and I think that the points you all make show how just complex this really is. It really is a balancing game. We can, at this point, I think what we need to do is I almost feel like we need to bring this back for one more workshop. I would ask the council if they would like us to do a public hearing on this before we have another one of these, or if we want to have one more work session and really narrow in what we think we want to do and then have a public hearing on what we want to do, or get public input on how to go forward with these different scenarios. That's a question I'd throw to council.
Summer, how many people are watching on YouTube right now?
It looks like about 15.
Okay, so it's of some interest, but not overwhelming, it would seem. That's a great question, Kaylin and Joel. I don't know the answer.
The indicator of how many people are watching right now, a lot of people go back and watch this throughout the week when they have time. So watching it live and the ability to watch it later on, I mean, a lot of people will see it later at a later date. But Mike's point to a public hearing being the only people who are participating in the moment, historically, that's how public hearings work in our head. But if we put it online, because we're in COVID and people can respond via email for 4 or 5 days once we post the agenda, then we get those comments before we go into that next work session. Ronnie?
I guess it could go either way, Joel, but it seems like in some ways there's an advantage to another workshop to hash it out more, and maybe the paper to do an article, because sometimes that gets people thinking about it more and they can prepare for the public hearing. But there are pros and cons, it seems like, to both approaches.
There's no doubt we got to have another workshop. The question I guess I have is public hearing before, workshop, public hearing after. I just, after being here for a year, it's clear to me that this council will want a public hearing at some point before we adopt anything on something like this. And so I'm trying to guide you in that direction because I feel like that's the direction I've been given to take these types of issues.
I mean, personally, I almost feel like another workshop where the media can report on it and help do a little education on. Sometimes that helps explain why it's necessary to begin with, why we can't do nothing, and what some of the parameters are. Sometimes that helps have a more informed, not always, but a more informed public hearing. But that may just be me.
So for straw poll, what council members are in favor of another workshop before we would take it to public hearing?
Before taking it to public hearing.
And we would decide whether or not we wanted public hearing. It looks like, Kaylin, was your thumb up? Okay.
Yes.
It looks like the majority are interested in another workshop with kind of the more concise. And we perhaps not need a workshop, but just an agenda item, a follow-up agenda item. Susie and Chuck, thank you so much. We're just at 7 o'clock now. So I think our next step is we close this Zoom and we go to our next Zoom link. And I will see you all soon. Right, Summer?
That's correct.
Okay, see you all soon.